super caffeinated, so this is either going to turn out really well or really terribly. We'll see. So I'm an associate professor in English and intermediate arts, writing and performance in the college. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is why the Media Archaeology Lab exists, what goes on in the lab, and then I'll end by talking about a few projects of mine that are coming out of the lab. And then I'm going to pass it on to a PhD student that I work with, Maya Livio, who's also done some great work in the lab. So I founded the lab in 2009, originally as a way to better understand early digital literature. I was, after all, hired to be a somewhat regular English professor, my poor department. There was one piece in particular I was interested in at that time. It was called First Screening. It was made in 1982 by a Canadian poet named B.P. Nichol, and he wrote it in Apple Basic on an Apple IIe computer, and he distributed it on 5¼ floppies. So what I wanted to do was pack 15 Apple IIe computers, 15 copies of this poem in a tiny little room, and get my undergraduates in there to work on experiencing it directly instead of experiencing the QuickTime movie version that you can find on YouTube. For better or for worse, I then wanted to see what it would be like to try out a comparable computer from the time. So then I got some Commodore 64s. And that was the beginning of the end. And that produced what you will see here. So what you're looking at here is just one side of one of 3 rooms that consists of the Media Archaeology Lab. And this is our non-Apple computer collection that includes that little red box there is actually a computer that I got from a German colleague. It was made in East Germany in 1986. And we also have a Swedish Apple IIe clone that's sitting on the shelf there from 1982. So lots of really cool, unusual computers. And we have lots of very popular computers. This is the Apple side of the room, also with our collection of luggables, portables, and laptops. The one computer that I love to point out to people is the Apple Lisa computer. It's the 3rd one in. Does anyone know how much that computer sold for in 1983? $10,000, I'll tell you, $10,000. And that's about $22,000 nowadays. So that's quite a precious and fascinating computer to have. Well, the lab is most well known for its collection of digital devices. We have a still functioning computer from 1976, and then computers all the way through the early 2000s. We also have a modest collection of analog media. So we have a camera from the 1890s that somebody used to photograph the CU Boulder campus, actually, which is really cool. All right. But the main point that I want to leave you with when I'm talking about the lab is despite this really fantastic collection of artifacts that we have, I really don't think of the lab as a museum. Instead, I think of it as a place for hands-on experimentation with still functioning media for students, researchers, and artists. And to answer the question of why, well, first of all, because I try to work against the computing industry's obsession with planned obsolescence and its attempts to convince you that you really must throw away your computer or your phone after only 2 or 3 years. By contrast, there's machines in the lab that work that are 30 years old. The other thing that I try to work against is the computing industry's obsession with convincing you that the only criteria for technological progress is speed and weight, and that the only way to have a computer that's light and fast is to make it a computer that's closed, that's hermetically sealed, and that you can't understand how it works. By contrast, a lot of the machines in the lab obviously are not fast and they are not light, but a lot of them actually have capabilities that your contemporary devices don't have. Also, most of them can be opened up, and like dealing with an old VW bug from the 50s or the 60s, you can actually understand how these computers work and get some sense of how your contemporary device works. So my main audience for these two things is primarily undergraduates. Maybe surprisingly to you, or maybe not, they're the most enthusiastic demographic for the lab. They get so excited when they get in there. And that's one of the few times that I really enjoy seeing them starting to text, because they're texting with their parents, actually. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to expose the lab to young children, so we had a little hands-on display at the Denver City Park Jazz Festival, and instantly all these little kids came running over to try out some of our old machines. And the rest of the time I get to talk to audiences, people ranging from Comic-Con attendees, if you're wondering why people are in costumes, that's why. Curators, archivists, librarians, museum professionals, historians, artists, and scholars. So interestingly enough, the Media Archaeology Lab cuts across a really wide swath of people. While most of my attention with the lab is directed at students, scholars, and artists, I did just want to finish up by mentioning that the lab drives most of my own research. And one of them that I'm working on right now is a book called The Lab Book, Situated Practices in Media Studies. It's a book I'm co-writing with 2 other people, and we are looking at both the long history of media labs, going back to Edison's lab in the 19th century, and also we're looking at why media labs have been suddenly proliferating like flies, or like whatever, in the last 10 years, and also why now everything is a lab. And this is a picture that my colleague took in a department store in Montreal. And a lab here is nothing more than a display, which I think is really strange and fascinating. The other project that I'm working on is called Other Networks. This is a history of pre-internet networks and the ways in which artists and writers experimented with these networks. And what you're looking at here is a terminal for accessing a time-sharing network that was in Canada, and it was actually extremely popular in the 70s and the 80s, but it's now almost completely been forgotten. So my job is to go and start excavating the remains of this network. And part of what I'm doing, sorry, I don't know why it keeps cutting out. As I'm excavating the network, what I'm finding is really fascinating material evidence of how our present-day internet was built. So I came across some corporate archives where they've meticulously documented each undersea cable that they laid that's resulted in us being able to use the internet across the world. So this is a map that I came across. And at the same time, I'm looking at how artists and writers in particular were experimenting with these networks. So the common thread on all these things is, I think, trying to get at the physicality and the materiality of things that you tend to think are ephemeral and very immaterial. So this is a wonderful image that I found in an archive in Victoria, British Columbia, of artists experimenting with a network they built on top of that time-sharing network. And they're using a simple email program in the late 1970s. And they're also using slow scan TV, which is a technology that I don't yet understand, I have to say. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to the lovely Maya Livio. Thanks, everyone, for listening.